I know I'm coming to meet with you all separately, but will I? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon to the people of Barbados and those hearing my voice. We have spent the better part of today in an extended consultation with the social partnership and the leaders of our churches and the leaders of our political parties, our main political parties, the leader of the opposition, leader of the Democratic Labour Party, and we have taken briefs and had the ability to consult over the course of the last 5-6 hours with respect to Barbados' preparedness for the COVID-19 epidemic that is affecting our region. As fate would have it, within the course of our meeting, news came of the confirmation of the first case within CARICOM. That is most to be regretted. But the reality is that, as you will hear, that it is likely that most countries across the world will be impacted by this new form of flu, coronavirus. I would like to invite the Acting Chief Medical Officer first to come and give the country context very briefly, and then I'm going to invite thereafter the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Democratic Labour Party, the representatives from the private sector, Labour, and the church to speak, and I will wrap up again. But before I do so, I want to say that there's a time in a nation's life when the divisions that otherwise separate us cannot be held on to. And this country, in our post-independence era, we have had a distinguished record of knowing how to stand together to fight common threats. This is a threat that faces all Barbadians, and we have within us the capacity to work together and to dig down deep to do that which is necessary to sustain life. I say often that nobody promised us a rose garden, and that is true. Our grandparents and our great-grandparents fought in a great war, great wars. Others have had other difficulties that we can't even begin to contemplate. And it is our time now to be able to rise, to be able to fight against what is literally shutting down too many parts of the world. There is a danger that even if we get not a single case of COVID-19, which is highly unlikely, that the consequences of this viral infection will lead to significant suffering among the world's population. It is already affecting the supply chains of the world, which will impact on the movement of not just food and pharmaceuticals, but other key pieces of equipment and spare parts. It is already affecting travel. While we were in the meeting, one of our main travel partners already reflected a further contraction. We took reports from the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association and the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. We've already seen some of our hotels start to face a contraction through cancellation in businesses. We anticipate that that will have an impact on workers. We are committed that in this country we carry one another. We do not leave people at the side of the road. And to that extent, I am a proud Barbadian today, first and foremost, that we know what it is to come together. It is against that background, therefore, that I'd like to ask Dr. Best to come because in all things we shall follow the science. We will not panic, but we will be ready to meet any eventuality. The only thing that panic does is to drive divisions among people. That is not the Barbadian way. We, however, are conscious that those who will want to act as outliers will have to do so knowing that they will face the full weight of whatever comes their way, whether it is in terms of hoarding or price gouging or any other inappropriate activity that seeks to take advantage of the most vulnerable among us. But what does it require of us? To go beyond our duty to self, go beyond our duty to family, go beyond our duty to country, and to begin to help those who most need help at this time. When you hear Dr. Best, you will understand that this is a viral condition that we can survive, and that 8 out of every 10 people who are affected are in fact mild. 1 to 2 are severe, and even those who are severe, 1 out of every 4 of them gets critical only, and not every critical case passes away. So that we can manage this. We can manage this. But we have to take care of those who are most vulnerable. And as we go on this afternoon, I'll speak again to that as Dr. Best will carry us where the science is, and we shall move therefrom. Dr. Best, thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. So in terms of COVID-19, the World Health Organization declared this a public health emergency of international concern since the 30th of January. And even prior to the World Health Organization making that declaration, the Ministry of Health identified what needed to be done and put certain systems in place. For instance, we focused on enhancing surveillance, so enhancing our ability to detect the importation of a case, and we did that at the ports of entry in particular, with emphasis on the countries of interest where the epidemic is strongest, and those are 4 countries at this point. We also did sensitization to the general public. We did training of healthcare providers and sensitization of healthcare providers to be able to detect and to manage cases of COVID-19. And we stood up the Health Emergency Operations Center at the Ministry of Health, recognizing that this went beyond the purview of just a health response. This requires a whole of government response. With the WHO recommending to countries to prepare for a pandemic on the 25th of February, which was just 2 short weeks ago, we recognized that we had to complete our pandemic preparedness plan, and we've done that. So what was presented to the government, in particular the National Security Council, just yesterday was a draft plan for the start of an epidemic in Barbados. It's not a matter of if this comes, we have to think that it is going to come and be absolutely ready and prepared to deal with it when it comes. So once again, I have to reiterate that this is a whole of government plan. And even though it was the Ministry of Health predominantly that put this plan together, we now have the opportunity to present it to all stakeholders, whether it be the social partnership and other government agencies and non-governmental organizations as well. And by the end of this week, that plan would be fully populated with all of the key activities that are required from each and every one that was represented at the social partnership meeting, as well as all arms of government. And with that said, what I will stress is that the World Health Organization is recommending containment and mitigation as the key strategies for addressing an outbreak, the possible outbreak of COVID. I should also stress that the aim of I didn't explain what the plan sought to do. So permit me just a few seconds to do that. So the plan is there to coordinate the framework for the national response for COVID-19. It offers guidance to stakeholders in developing their own individual plans. And once again, this is all of government. So we have 4 stages of the plan, starting at stage 0, where we are right now. And Each stage, each of the 4 stages have specific triggers which will implement, or rather be the impetus for certain actions from the various stakeholders. So when we get our first suspected case, for instance, we will stand up the National Emergency Operations Center and activate the isolation centers. When we have in-country human-to-human transmission, that will trigger stage 2, and then a series of actions to follow. And then we have the 4th and final stage, which is stage 3, at which point we will declare a state of emergency, and any additional supplementary facilities that need to be put into action will be open for us to be able to control the existing cases of COVID-19 and to be able to control the spread of COVID-19 going forward. So I think with that very brief summary, I apologize for making it very short, but this was actually a longer presentation that I would have done. And the one point that I wanted to make and stress that the Prime Minister just made is that solidarity is key. This is not one sector of government, this is not one sector in Barbados that is going to be required to respond. This is every single person, every single sector is going to be required to play a role and to understand what it is that we in government are doing, what it is that we in the Ministry of Health and Wellness are doing, and what it is that we recommend to control, to contain, and to mitigate COVID-19. So with those few words, I thank you.
Could you speak to the individual things that people need to do, please?
Sure. So we have specific recommendations that we want the public to understand in terms of prevention or reducing the likelihood of acquiring COVID-19 if ever exposed. So for instance, hand hygiene is absolutely critical. And by hand hygiene, we mean frequent hand washing and the use of alcohol-based hand sanitizers. We would obviously want people to avoid contact with persons who are obviously sick. So if you know of a case of COVID-19 or somebody who has a suspected case of COVID-19, we want social distancing to take place. There are other strategies that include the respiratory etiquette. So you don't cough into your plain hands, you cough or sneeze into tissue, you discard that tissue immediately into a bin, or you cough, not into your hands once again, but into your elbow. So those are certain key public health strategies that we recommend. We don't recommend, for instance, the use of surgical masks or the use of specialized masks in the general setting. Those are reserved for healthcare providers actually working with persons who are suspected or confirmed cases of COVID-19. So it's important to stress, I think most of you in this room would already know that there's no specific treatment at this juncture and there's no vaccine for it. So it's very different from when you have a case of the flu, which has vaccines and for which we have antimicrobial treatment as well. So our best measures are those that are proven, which are some of the public health measures that I've just recommended.
Thank you very much, Dr. Best. I'm going to ask Dr. Best to stay on when we go into our meeting with the permanent secretaries and heads of department, so that if there are any further questions that you have for him, or when the press gets a chance at the end to ask questions, he'll be available to do that. Could I ask now Bishop Atherley, please?
You know, there's nothing like the Barbadian spirit. Dr. Best just told us there's no vaccine, there's no cure for this thing, and we laugh rather gleefully. That's the kind of spirit that we need, the Barbadian spirit. The Barbadian spirit. Our Prime Minister and leaders, PSs, other public service members of the press, I want to appreciate, Prime Minister, the usefulness of the exercise this morning. And thank you for including the opposition in the exposure to the information shared by all the professionals. It was enlightening in many instances. reassuring as well in many instances. I rather think, though, it should not take a crisis or a threat of a crisis to bring us to moments like that when we put our heads and hearts together and have a national consultation on major issues. But this exercise really was rather useful this morning, as I'm sure this one to follow will be. So I appreciate it as the Leader of the Opposition on behalf of the party, the People's Party, which I have the honor to lead. I want to express that appreciation as well. There's something that struck me. It was reinforced today, has occurred to me before, and it is simply this: whether or not we have one instance of anybody in Barbados being infected, this crisis is still a major event for us, because the Barbados economy and our national well-being seriously under threat as a result of this, if we observe what is already happening in the world. Our trade connections, our trade connectivity, our reliance on tourism, the tough economic times that we are already facing even before this crisis. It creates almost a perfect storm for us. And Barbadians have really got to respond to this with full spirit and with prudence. And I want to publicly applaud the government for taking the lead, the Prime Minister for taking the lead in so doing, and reassuring Barbadians, getting the work of preparation done to ensure that we are in a position that we understand the threat and that we understand how we can best respond to the threat. All of us can be impacted by this. It's not only a threat to national well-being, but each of us can be impacted by this. But equally so, I think each of us has a responsibility and an opportunity to be part of the solution to the problem. And I think that's part of the thinking that goes into sessions such as this. Perhaps our normal and natural disposition is to think of self, to be self-absorbed, to be self-focused. But here is a clear instance in which we have to be what I call in church circles other-minded. We don't need to seek only to protect ourselves, but by our actions and what we do, seek to protect the health and well-being of others. The one last word which quickly I would want to say is perhaps simply this. There is sometimes that which comes to the surface, an attitude that says that God is a Bajan. Well, God is global, but see what's happening in the rest of the globe. And we need to put our hearts, put our hands together, bring our spirits to the cause, and do our best in the interest of the country. Thank you.
I'm not sure that we'll be able to hug in the future again, so we're hugging now. No. That's a public health statement. I'd like to ask Mr. Pisa, please, to come and address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Good afternoon to all of you. If ever there was a statement that this is a national issue, it is to have a head table as presently constituted. Today, we are called upon to be Barbadians more than anything else. We rest aside our colors, whatever we may have as our predispositions and our thinkings, and put our country at the forefront. We are at all times operating within a global environment, and for that reason, if none other, we have to protect Barbados. Because coming out on the other side of this issue, and I'm hesitating to use the word crisis because it hasn't reached that point for us as yet, but coming out on the other side of this issue must be a country that remains poised to play its part on the world stage. The call then is to all Barbadians to take their individual steps in terms of their own hygiene, to take their steps within their communities in terms of sharing information and not misinformation. And the call then is on all Barbadians together as a nation to do what is necessary to protect ourselves. And in protecting ourselves in terms of our physical well-being, we will also be doing our part in preserving our country. Because at the end of the day, all of us have a part to play. All of us have a role in this society. And we have to ensure, not just in terms of our health, but in terms of our economic position, that we do all that is necessary to move this country to the next stage. This is a hiccup in our development, and it is not one that we had any makings of. This is an international issue that has a national impact, and therefore each and every one of us is called upon to play a part. And I know that as Barbadians, because we tend to have our political colors shown in season, that now that it is out of season, that we will wear our national colors and our national pride will come to the forefront, and we will do all that we are called upon to do and follow our health directives as closely as possible. And therefore, Madam Prime Minister, not even for a political opportunity do I think that we ought to be hugging, but certainly it is enough of a political statement to have all of us here present and speaking to you today. And I think that underscores the importance of the initiatives that are being taken on behalf of us and the importance of the role that we each have to play. And I look forward to working with you, Prime Minister, and all of you in the room, and all of Barbados, to making sure that Barbados not only remains unscathed in terms of the COVID-19 itself, but comes out on the other side of this with as little bruises as possible. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pisa, and I thank you for your comments as well. I'd like to invite now the head of the private sector, Mr. Ed Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. It's always difficult to follow an opposition leader and a leader of another opposition party as a speaker. But I want to, first of all, thank the Prime Minister for a strong leadership, pulling this team together today, pulling the social partnership together to explain where we are as a country and what we need to do together as a country. We heard from many members of government, and we heard from members of the tourist industry, Mr. Austin and team. It is important that everybody works together for the good of Barbados at this time. I assured the team today that the private sector is going to play its part. We know that there are concerns by the public about price gouging at this time globally. We have heard in the news reports about some of that taking place in some of the other markets. This is not something that we should tolerate in Barbados. And I certainly will not be someone tolerating such price gouging anywhere in Barbados. We believe that even the hoarding of supplies is something that should be discouraged. I think we all need to understand that the weakest link is still a problem for us. It is no sense for those that can afford to hoard, not to allow those that don't have to procure. Because that person that doesn't have is the weakest link. So we must all protect ourselves, protect our country from that basic situation. We must all be selfless and not selfish at this time. There's no greed needed in Barbados at this time. It's a time that we all come together, whether it's a political party or private sector, labor leaders, to work together to ensure that Barbados comes out of this strong. We heard today that there are threats to the economy if the virus comes to us in a very harsh way. We also know that the global economy is going to be severely impacted at this time. We see what's happening to the various markets out there. But it's not a time to panic. The world gets through these situations. Barbados can get through these situations. So we must ensure that we do not panic as a country. We must be prepared. We must take our own precautions. We don't have to go to congregate in locations overseas if you don't need to. You don't need to attend conferences if you don't have to. And I would ask people to ensure that they protect themselves in various locations like that. But this is a time for us to stay together as a country. And I can assure you, Prime Minister, and the members of this audience here, that we in the private sector will do our utmost to work together with the government and the people of Barbados to ensure that we come out of this strong. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Could I ask the head of the labor movement now to come, please?
Thank you, Prime Minister, and good afternoon to everyone. Now, we heard Dr. Best speak a bit earlier about a whole of government coordinated effort in pulling together a plan. And we heard all of the other speakers speak about a whole of country, a whole of Barbados attitude and response to making sure that we can address the issue before us. And representative of the labor movement, I would want to just echo the sentiments that you've heard earlier in this regard, because there's a saying that in times of crisis, we depend on goodwill and generosity. And that is what basically every other speaker has been saying to us. Goodwill, the kind of forum we had this morning where we had some very sobering comments being made. We have come face to face with an issue that is not just about health. It's an issue of health. It's an issue of the economy. It's an issue of our country, the well-being, the entire well-being of our country, and of course the interconnectedness of Barbados to the rest of the world. The fact that we don't grow our own food, we depend on the outside world for virtually everything that we source and use. It really brings our vulnerability to the fore. But what has been reassuring is that we have a country, not only a good leader, but in times of crisis, although we don't want to say that, in times of crisis, we can come together to ensure that we bolster this 166 square miles in the ways that matter most, and that we can commit, notwithstanding our stakeholder interests at other points in time, so we can commit to ensuring that we do all that is necessary to ensure that Barbados comes out of this not only with minimal bruising, but we can come out better for it, because there is power in unity. There's improvements that come with unity and with solidarity, and that was demonstrated for the past few hours and will continue throughout the coming weeks and months. I just want to urge all of us, we cannot say it enough, and we have to, you as permanent secretaries and leaders within the public sector, you also have an obligation to make sure you spread the message of good personal hygiene. As Barbadians, as citizens, as people, we take a lot for granted. And this is not the time to be panicked, as everyone is saying, but this is the time to be cautious and be cognizant of how our actions impact not only ourselves, but on everybody else. So I just want to thank you. You'll be hearing a lot more from the experts, but this is just another opportunity to let you know as well that labor is on board. We have the best interest not only of our frontline workers, but of all workers and their families in Barbados. Thank you.
Thank you. Major?
Thank you, Prime Minister. See, I'm a final speaker. I guess my responsibility is here to you to accept all that has been said already, because I think that is important. I will not repeat what I've said, but I'm here representing the churches, and that's including Barbados Christian Council, PARI, and Barbados Evangelical Association. We want to say thanks to Prime Minister and for your initiative, for the vision, because she did not speak as another leader who said it's just a hoax. she sees as a reality, a potential threat to our nation, and have set in motion the importance of sensitizing our people to this very serious threat that faces us. We, the church, we are very conscious of the fact that it's not just a medical issue, but we see it as a potential social and economic issue. It can cause disruption in our national life. And therefore, we want to urge you, each of you, to follow these simple guidelines given by our medical people. They have our interests at heart. And I want to believe that you have the interests of your own country at heart, and that you would do what you have to do to make sure that you stay safe. And not only stay safe, but make others safe as well. We have no control over what might come to us, but we have control as to what we would do when it comes to us. And the reality is that this threat is a serious possibility to our nation. So I want you to follow these simple guidelines and do what is important to keep yourself safe, your family safe, and this nation safe as well. We are very small, and it's very quick for any, and not only small, but we're also closely knitted community, and it's very easy for this germ to spread quite rapidly. And if it begins to spread, we can be easily wiped out in a short space of time. And we don't want that. We have a beautiful future ahead, and we want you to do your best. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you very much, Major Wilkinson. Ladies and gentlemen, I've asked the others to speak first because it is important that you understand, as I share with you what took place this morning, that we speak as one Barbados. We will act as one Barbados. We will rise as one Barbados. And the reality is that we took presentations from the Pan American Health Organization, from the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA, and from the Ministry of Health, some of which was shared by Dr. Best, who is the Acting Chief Medical Officer with you. CARPHA has advised us that they have upgraded the risk of transmission of COVID-19 in the Caribbean from high to very high. And as I indicated, we would have had during the course of our meeting communication of the first case within the English-speaking Caribbean, and in particular in CARICOM. It is against that background, can you close the door please? Let's close the door please. It is against that background that we are here today. Close the door for me, I'm hearing. Thank you. It's against that background that we are here today to be able to ensure that we shift from preparedness to readiness and rapid response. Because even though we were advised of it across the world, it is in the context of it having reached the Americas within the last 2 weeks that clearly we understand that it is coming closer to us. Having said that, we believe that we are ready for most of it, and we will continue to expand capacity. Our duty as a nation is to work together and to recognize that we don't need to have COVID-19 to suffer the consequences of COVID-19. I've indicated before that the Ministry of Health has been the one taking the lead thus far, and over the course of the last 5.5 weeks, the Ministry of Health, the immigration officers, Port Health, the Barbados Defense Force, the members of the Barbados Port, they have been the frontline workers for the most part, allowing us to be able to meet any threat that exists thus far. We have been very measured in our responses, but we've been very thorough. Most people are not aware that we have the capacity to do significant screening with respect to all persons coming to our country as a result of a matter that we put in place, an institution that we put in place in 2006 called the Joint Regional Communications Center that we did for Cricket World Cup, and it is one of the legacies of Cricket World Cup that allows us to monitor and track the movement of persons coming into our borders. Similarly, the Ministry of Health has developed sufficient protocols that have allowed them over the course of the last 5.5 weeks to screen 156 people and to do 8 tests, 8 actual tests, all of which have been negative thus far. And we thank God for that thus far. But the bottom line is that we have to continue to be vigilant. And we have, therefore, to formally approve the National Pandemic Plan, Preparedness Plan. Today's meetings have been about getting and sharing with our colleagues across the political spectrum, with the private sector and labor, with the church, because the church, perhaps more than any other institution in this country, sees people on a weekly basis from all spheres of life. Against that background, we will have a consultation now with the heads of departments and permanent secretaries in the government of Barbados. Tomorrow, when regrettably I have to go to Guyana to lead a team of prime ministers from within the region to deal with their difficult situation there, as you are aware, Minister Bostic and Minister Walcott will further brief all of the members of Parliament, both in the Senate and the backbenchers, and those other cabinet ministers who would not have been present today. And then Cabinet will finally sign off on the National Preparedness Plan for the pandemic on Thursday afternoon. It is against that background that we know we will have a plan that is owned and supported by all Barbadians who are right thinking. But we are conscious that the arrangements that we have to put in place have to be guided by a few principles. One, that we must seek first to stop transmission and prevent the spread. And if that doesn't fully work, we must then slow transmission and prevent spread. And finally, Plan C is to slow transmission and to reduce impact. That clarity of thought, clarity of decision making, clarity of communication is absolutely critical if we are to look back at this moment in time and the days and weeks that will follow, to ensure that we come out as unscathed as possible, first in the protection of human life, and then in the protection of quality of life. We are conscious, as I've said before, that the epidemic of rumor is worse than the epidemic of virus. The epidemic of panic is worse than the epidemic of the virus. And I say so because I've already shared with you that the vast majority of cases that have existed in the world, there have been 116,000 cases roughly at 10 o'clock this morning that have been reported, and there have been just under 4,000 deaths across the world. Now, one death is simply too much, but we have to be prepared to particularly reach out to those who are most vulnerable among us. And as we discussed in our meeting today, not everybody who is vulnerable listens to radio, listens to the television, is on social media. And therefore, all of us, all bar none, have a duty now to spread the message and to reinforce the behaviors that we would want our population and our people to reflect. From the not touching of faces, to the washing of hands regularly, or the use of the alcohol-based hand sanitizer. I've listened very carefully, alcohol-based hand sanitizer. To coughing in our elbow if we have to cough, to trying as much as possible to keep tissues on us, to use those tissues. All of these things may sound simple, but the more I listen to doctors locally, regionally, and internationally, I am satisfied that more than anything else, hand hygiene and keeping your hands away from your eyes, your nose, your mouth, I almost said your ears, is absolutely vital to self-protection. And we have to go the highways and byways. We have to use the new media and the traditional media. We have to walk through. We have to ask the traditional media to start running PSAs on their own, because not everything is paid media. And I have asked that they also come and meet with the media managers as well before the end of the week. But in addition to the Health Emergency Operations Committee, which Dr. Bess referred to, and which has been meeting almost every day for the last 5.5 weeks. So don't believe that because we're speaking to you today that everything is starting today. We have been working assiduously with those frontline workers and with the frontline ministries and with the key members of the National Security Council. Yesterday, however, we took a decision to augment the National Security Council and to ensure that we move to an augmented National Security Council for the life of this threat. And that we use simply the acronym ANASEC, A-N-A-S-E-C, which is just the short for Augmented National Security Council. And it has therefore now allowed us to bring in the other key ministries and officials that are necessary in the frontline battle that we have to face to protect and sustain Barbadians as we go forward. In addition to that, which is a very pragmatic approach, we need to ensure that in the event that there are people who have to be quarantined or isolated, we have the capacity to do it. And we have a very simple philosophy. We need to isolate the Queen Elizabeth Hospital from what is going on with COVID-19, because there are still normal people who need the hospital on a daily basis in this country. And what we will not do with a lone acute care facility is to put it at risk whatsoever. We are conscious that every country around us and in this hemisphere is facing the same considerations. And therefore, we really have to look within to protect ourselves. It is against that background that the government has had a number of actions taken. Over the course of the last few weeks, the Ministry of Health, the Minister of Health would have announced, and we would have gone to Parliament for the initial funds to be able to refurbish the St. Lucie District Hospital and the Elaine Scanterbury Centre. Those two facilities will hold just under 40 persons as a quarantine facility. We've also prepared and readied Paragon in the event that we need those additional quarantine beds at any point before we finish the work that I will describe shortly at Harrison's Point. And Paragon is, as you know, also not just the home of the Barbados Defence Force, but also the home of the Barbados Youth Advance Corps. And to the extent that we need to suspend, we don't know, but if we need to suspend any part of the residential program, that will be done with the appropriate notice being given to the persons affected. At Paragon, I'm advised that we can hold just under anywhere between 250 to 275 to 80 beds for quarantine. And then, of course, as I've indicated to the country already, Harrison's Point, which we used before, which was the former U.S. naval base, and which was brought back into use at a previous time when we had another national calamity. That base, we are now starting the work there on a number of buildings, not the entire base, but a number of key buildings, that will allow us to have another quarantine facility of housing anywhere between 120 to 140 beds. And I say so because they're finishing up the architectural details as I speak. And that will be for a quarantine facility. But most importantly, a capacity to have an isolation facility of 56 beds, 20 with ventilators and 36 without, and this would be for the severe patients. We already have tonight, tomorrow, yesterday, the Enmore Isolation Facility, which has 6 beds and which is capable of dealing with any immediate case. We go to Parliament this evening with a supplementary for the ventilators and the furniture and the other things that are needed. That is just under $8.8 million, or just about $8.8 million. And we are awaiting the pricings for the capital refurbishment of the facility to allow us to be able to proceed. MTW has already done a lot of the clearing of the premises and facility, and we anticipate that with 2 shifts working per day, 7 days a week, that we will be able to get in as soon as possible. Do not ask me for a timeline, because I'm waiting on both the formal timeline as well as the formal figures from the project manager. Suffice it to say that multiple contractors will be engaged so as to have parallel work at the same time to finish as fast as possible. Against that background, however, we've also made some decisions, and I would have shared this afternoon with others, that Dr. Corey Ford will be the isolation facilities manager. I should have said as well that the Barbados Defence Force has a field hospital, which will also, if necessary, be available to give us 40 isolation beds. And therefore, between the 40 with the BDF, the 56 at Harrison's Point, and the 6 at the Enmore facility, we have the potential for 102 isolation beds, which for an island this size is a significant amount of capacity. We are conscious that we are not only, however, treating to our own needs, that Barbados has visitors every day, they're called tourists, and that we also have, although much of it is coming to an end very shortly, home port obligations, because the winter season is coming to an end very shortly. Dr. Corey Ford, therefore, will be the person who is the isolation facilities manager. He is chief of infections, I believe, and works at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And he has been engaged and really has been flat out along with the other officers. I really want to commend all of them. The chief medical officer, substantively acting, Dr. George, who is not with us, Dr. Bess, Dr. Singh. There's been a whole set of them who literally have worked beyond the call of duty, similarly with the nurses, and we're very grateful to them. We are very, very lucky as well that there is a Barbadian who has rendered distinguished service in Sierra Leone, and who would have worked extensively, and I refer to Mr. Alvin Hart, and he will be the quarantine facilities manager for all of our quarantine facilities. And I would have just had the Minister of Foreign Affairs speak to the British High Commission, because Mr. Richard Carter, who is substantively employed with DFID and who was responsible for leading the outreach effort in Sierra Leone for Ebola and received a special medal from Her Majesty the Queen for his efforts in Sierra Leone, has kindly agreed to be the czar for COVID-19, to operate out of my office and to literally liaise with every ministry and every sector. I think I've said enough today to show you that there are multiple line ministries affected. There are multiple stakeholders affected. The communication has to be clear. The worst thing that can happen to us at this stage is that we muddle the communication and that we fail to adhere to clear and distinct decision-making protocols. Against that background as well, we are conscious of the fact that there will be consequences to the economy and potentially to jobs. As we met today, one of our prime airline partners, as I said, indicated a contraction and are already asking us to work with them with respect to some of the costs that they face. At the same time, the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association and its president is here with us, Mr. Steve Austin, would have reported cancellations across a range of properties starting already. But we are conscious that it is still too early for them to give us a clear picture of the extent of it. We are lucky that this is coming at the back end of our winter season and not at the front end, but nevertheless, it is likely to have significant consequences. As we are all aware, Barbados is under its own economic recovery and transformation program, which has been sanctioned by the IMF and which has allowed us to be able to stabilize significantly, and we are, without fear of contradiction, away from the fact that we would have found ourselves in initially where the value of our exchange rate was at risk. Today, as I speak to you, Barbados's reserves stand at $1,544,000,000. This is a long way from the 440 million of 18, 19 months ago. But having said that, we are conscious that that buffer that we have will now be put under some stress. And I've asked, last week I spoke to the president of the Caribbean Development Bank on behalf of the region, and I spoke to the director of finance, the governor of the central bank, and my senior economic advisor, Dr. Greenidge, Professor Maskell, and the central bank, and they have kindly produced scenarios which they shared with us today. And those scenarios are premised really, I think they may have shared three, but they're really three scenarios: a 25% decline in tourism revenue, a 50% decline in tourism revenue, and a severe case of an 80% decline over 6 months. 25 to 50% will come within the 3-month period. This has not only implications at the macro level for the hotels and the owners, but at the micro level for the workers and the suppliers to the hotels. And therefore, the government has taken a firm decision that we will undertake counter-cyclical fiscal policies. A lot of fancy words for saying that we need to spend money in order to make sure that if a man can't work fully or a woman can't work fully within the tourism sector, that there will be other areas of economic activity in the country that we will now trigger or expedite in order to be able to keep as many people working as possible. Put it simply, that if a woman is working as a waitress, she has children, she may be put on a short week. If we can ensure that the children's father is working or the husband is working, then at least there's still money coming into the household. It is against that background that we took presentations also, therefore, today from Dr. Greenidge and a number of other persons that look at what would be the kinds of actions that we would be proposing. Let me say that Dr. Greenidge, I spoke to the IMF on Friday night. Dr. Greenidge has already been in contact with the fund, and therefore those scenarios that we have prepared are now the basis for discussions between us and the fund. Our program, as you know, has been premised on us being able to bring down our debt first and foremost, and then to start to consolidate our fiscal position and to start to trigger growth. We have been successful in not only boosting our reserves, as I said, to the $1,544,000,000. We've been successful in ensuring that we have been able to meet the surpluses that we are required to meet. And once again, a fancy set of language simply to say that you have to keep paying down your debt every year, and that by 2032 we are supposed to get it down to 60% debt to GDP. We've moved from 177% where we were at the beginning to 119% where we are now. But we are meeting, really, I think you said it well, a hiccup. And this hiccup is one that we have to face, because what is at stake is human life. We can continue, however, to keep paying down our debt. And to use a simple analogy, I can lose weight at £6 a week, I can lose weight at £4 a week, or I can lose weight at £3 a week. But when I've done, I'm still losing weight. So whether we run a 6% primary surplus or a 4% primary surplus or a 3% fiscal primary surplus, we are still paying down our debt. But what we need now is a little elbow room to ensure that households do not fall through the cracks, to ensure that businesses are not pushed into bankruptcy en masse, to ensure that we can sustain life, sustain and protect our people, and allow them to live while the world finds the solution for the vaccination that will hopefully bring this madness to an end. And I do believe, quite frankly, there is a level of global panic. And I hope and pray that that panic will be brought back and that we will start to act in context. We manage risk every day. We do that. Whether it is to keep our hands out of fire, we manage in risk. Whether it is not to jump in a 20-foot pool when you can't swim, we manage in risk. Whether it is recognizing that as a double amputee, it is not wise for you to go and jump in a Kadooment band or even a single amputee, we manage in risk. And one of the risks that we will have to manage is that persons who are most vulnerable to this are people who are elderly. The PAHO Director General used the figure of 80 years old. I perhaps carry it a little lower to maybe 75. And people who have chronic conditions, underlying health conditions, because as I understand it, it is a viral pneumonia, and your body has to be able to fight it off. And therefore, since there is no medication to cure you, if your underlying medical condition is not strong, your body is not going to be able to easily fight it off. So those people who you know, who are elderly, or who have serious cardiovascular or other respiratory conditions or underlying health conditions, should immediately avoid large gatherings. We as a country have not reached the stage yet where we are having to consider the kind of restrictive actions that others are considering. And we have very clear protocols, as Dr. Best said, and as we've shared, stage 0, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. We are still at stage 0. I hope we stay there. But I'm conscious that if we have to move to stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3 as we go along, we have agreed that we are moving as one Barbados, and that to that extent, all of us who have consulted will continue to consult and to remain together in our actions to protect the majority of people of this nation that we can. As I said, the countercyclical fiscal policies are those things, therefore, that will engage us. We anticipate that our discussions with the International Monetary Fund will take probably another few weeks at most, a week or two at most. But we already have a sense of the things that we need to do. And I've already spoken to some of the capital expenditure that is required as a result for the Ministry of Health to be able to effectively help and handle this. The 25 ventilators that we're going to Parliament to be able to purchase this afternoon will allow us to be able to locate ventilators at Harrison's Point and also at the Barbados Defence Force Field Hospital if there's a need to stand it up. We are also going to buy 2 portable dialysis machines to put at the Elaine's Canterbury Centre, because we recognize that some people who may have to be quarantined may be on dialysis. And as I said, the principle is insulate the Queen Elizabeth Hospital from having to help us deal with this crisis. Barbadians must be able to be comfortable, and that is why we are identifying point people as well, rather than diluting or taking the focus away from the other things that the Ministry of Health have as a matter critically to do to protect our people. What are some of the projects that, in addition to the health expenditure related capital projects that we will have to look at? We've already identified a number of government buildings that we would have liked to have included in this year's estimates coming up. But because of the limited fiscal space, we couldn't include it. We are now in a position, we hope, after conclusion of our discussions with the IMF, so long as we can get an increase in fiscal space, a loosening of the fiscal targets, as well as the opportunity for what we call precautionary standby financing in case we need to be able to ensure that we bolster, because in the absence of tourism revenues and foreign exchange coming in, we will see a decline on our reserves, but we will have, hopefully, the capacity to draw down if we need beyond that which was agreed before. And that is what we are seeking to negotiate with the IMF. Augmentation of resources and additional fiscal space through the relaxation of fiscal targets and debt targets in order for us to keep Barbadians above the water. In addition to that, we are satisfied that we can now move quicker on being able to bolster other capital projects that we would otherwise have not have been able to accommodate, separate from the government buildings, some including roads. We've already started a significant roads program, but anything that will allow people to be able to come to work and earn money legitimately. We have the Fairchild Street Vending Mall that is about to start any minute now, and we hope to be able to carry that eventually into the river, Baxter's Road, and the refreshing of Oystins when we finish there. We also have some other projects that we want to do within the IDC for an innovation center and other facilities that will eventually look to be able to move some of our wayside mechanics into cluster operations rather than them being able to just fix cars in communities. These are things that we would have wanted to do long time, but we could only inch because of the fiscal space that we had. Hopefully this will give us an opportunity now to do other things. In addition to that, the private sector projects that are virtually ready, many of which you know before, that are ready for execution in the next 3 months, some have already started, some are about to start, and I refer to the Crane Hotel, which has already started, I think, with another 50 rooms. Then we have Sam Lord's Castle, which has started, and as you know, Sam Lord's Castle, only 1/3 of the project was completed, so there's a significant amount of work still to be completed there. There is another 66 rooms at Sandals, and they've started to clear for that, and that's at Sandals in Christchurch. And those rooms have to be finished by November, so we anticipate that that work will go forward quickly. The Hyatt is likely to start within this period as well. In fact, the earthworks should start within the next 2 months or so, including the destruction of the building. I see town planning nodding their head. The sale of Apes Hill golf course took place and villas. They have to refurbish the golf course and also look at building new villas. The Indigo, which is the old Caribbean Hotel, which we've spoken to already, that is virtually finished the town planning process now, and they're almost ready to start. And Royalton Sunwing, which has bought the old Discovery Bay Hotel, and we gave them permission to build a demonstration room now, and they are hoping to start by June. But the preliminary works will start before that because they will have to demolish the existing building as well. We have already seen the ice cream manufacturing plant and meat processing plant for Chefette. Both of those have started, and they intend and hope to start the entertainment center. Their initial plan was May. Government's housing program is likely to get off the ground fully in the next 3 months. We have identified, without prejudice to the private sector lots that exist with whom we'll be speaking, but we've identified on our own, separate from that, an initial 1,580 lots, house lots, and there will be another 200 acres as well, which we have derived with planning gains. It has not cost the government of Barbados a single cent for those, and we're trying to cap the land prices, particularly for those who are earning $4,000 or less in the public and private sector, and we are now working with the banks and financial institutions for the kinds of mortgages. In fact, one of the interesting things is that we are actually at a stage in the country, because the cost of capital has dropped, that it may well be cheaper to own, that it is cheaper, not may well be, it is cheaper to own than to rent property in today's market, and therefore we need to. I could not forget, of course, that Sagicor's project in Boarded Hall. Mr. Clark, I think you indicated that will go into full construction from 1 May? Late April, within 4 to 6 weeks. So we have a significant amount of projects to keep economic activity in this country going. But we're not only relying on construction. We took presentations from the Ministry of Agriculture, because we are conscious that as an island, we must always be able to ensure that people can eat, even if not what they would like to, what they need to. Even if not what they would like to, what they need to. And to that extent, we focus on 6-week crops, 12-week crops, and 6-month crops. But we are conscious that we have a duty, particularly if ships are not moving. Nobody's going to come and say we come into just an island that got less than 300,000 people just so. So that we have to be ready for all eventualities. And to that extent, particularly with us going into the hurricane season in June, we believe that we need to do a number of things. The Ministry of Agriculture has identified opportunities for expanded production, first and foremost, with 750 acres that we believe we can bring into production. And ironically, this paper was done prior to COVID-19. It's just that it is now absolutely timely for us. And to that extent, through a combination of working with existing established farmers, farmers from the New Feed program, and then also expanded production at the prison and at the Barbados Defense Force, should be able to allow us to be able to have a significant expansion of those vegetables in particular and some root crops that will allow us to be able to start. I hope that this will be a pattern that will be sustained and not used just simply for this period that we are undergoing as a very challenging period. Chickens, 6 weeks. A lot of people used in our day when we were growing up to keep and rear some of their own, but we expect in any event that the major producers will be expanding production, because it is quicker to bring a chicken to market than almost any other form of livestock. And of course, we have the wonderful oceans around us and the fishermen who will continue to fish and who are not affected. In addition to that, there are 1 or 2 aspects of domestic manufacturing that we will be focusing on. I don't want at this stage to get into the details of that, but suffice it to say that we will be meeting with them in the coming days to be able to deal with that. My friends, this is a difficult time for the world, not just for the Caribbean, not just for Barbados. But I have every confidence that given what we know our grandparents and great-grandparents and those before them went through, that we are still not being tested as they were, and that we have it within us to rise to the occasion. COVID-19 is major, but our resolve and our resilience is even bigger than that. And I have every confidence that those of us who are now going to enter the realm of protecting each other, sharing with each other, reminding each other, exhorting each other to do the things that are necessary to protect first and foremost your own personal hygiene, that of your family, that of your workplace, that of your community, that it is within us to do so. We cannot shut down ourselves from the rest of the world. Barbados will never be able to produce enough of whatever it needs to turn inward. And I'm conscious that as a people, we know that instinctively. But as I said, we have the capacity within us to manage risk. And I ask us, therefore, to break it down in simple terms for people. Because once you understand that it is about managing risk, then I tell you, we got this too. Once we understand that it is about people taking precautions, then chances are we got this too. But if it so happens that we need to quarantine large numbers, we have that too. The Attorney General is looking at whatever other powers we may need in order to be able to protect the integrity of the sanctity of life first, and then the capacity of this country to maintain the quality of life thereafter. Protect and sustain our people while building capacity. We also discussed the expansion of our national training initiative, because while our people are building or maybe on short week or laid off, regrettably, if it comes to that, they must be able to be doing something and learning something, so that when we return, when normal service resumes, we will return stronger and better and capable of carrying our country forward in a way that all of us want us to do. So I want to thank the people who are listening to us. I'm going to have a meeting now with the permanent secretaries and the heads of government departments. We'll take a few questions from the press first. But you know, there's an ability for us to control, and I think it was Major Wilkinson who said it, that we don't control what circumstances we meet, but we control our responses to those circumstances. And yesterday, Dr. Best quoted from the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, who said, and I quote, "Let hope be the antidote to fear, and let humanity be the antidote to our shared threats." Barbadians are known for their measured response. Barbadians are known for their pragmatism. Barbadians are known for their commitment to principle. Barbadians are known for not being intimidated by circumstances. I am proud to be a Barbadian today. And I'm proud that the leaders of this country have come together with a singular purpose: to protect our people, to sustain our people, and to allow us to come back stronger and better as we build capacity. But above all else, I am proud that we are prepared to fight as one and to call on all Barbadians who are hearing our voices or who will see us in the next few weeks, whoever we are, to join us in the protection of this, our people, and our nation. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the media for any of us? Bishop Atherley ran off to Parliament, in fairness to him, but I know that he's available to you if you need him as well. And Parliament has resumed, as we are doing multiple things at once, as you know. Are there any questions, or are you comfortable?
One question, Prime Minister.
Please.
Are there any
You may have to speak louder, because remember, they're streaming.
Are there any specific governmental actions that are attached to Carrefour's movement of the risk factor from high to very high?
No, we anticipated it would come, quite frankly, and that's why the Ministry of Health has already been in a position that we could immediately have the discussion on the draft national pandemic plan, which is effectively what we discussed. As I said a week ago, I started to speak to the various bodies to prepare for the economic adjustments that we have to make. So in fairness, we are really well ahead of the game, but I hope that it is a drill, but I'm sanguine that it might not be, and to the extent that it might not be, we will then move. I also want to say that the situation is fluid, and therefore it is going to require flexibility, and that's why the ANASEC, the Augmented National Security Council, really is the effective entity working with the people who I spoke, the Ministry of Health officials, the border officials, and the various entities. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Have there been any discussions as it relates to the NIS and its role? And we mentioned about workers and
Yeah. Luckily, most of our Social Security funds are in reasonable healthy state. However, if we have to, the government will top up. but the bottom line is that our unemployment benefit scheme, in fact, Senator Moore, who's a director of the NIS, may be in a better position to speak than the minister, who is me. But the severance payments fund and the unemployment benefit fund is in relatively good shape. The training initiative is in relatively good shape. So, but we expect some body blows, and we have to be prepared to meet them. Our simple thesis is to be able to sustain one another and to protect one another. Any more? Okay. Yes?
You would have talked about operations. We have several music festivals, several entertainment events that are supposed to be coming up in the upcoming weeks, and also Trima Horror Festival. What preparations?
I said very fluid. There are 4 stages. Stage 0 does not require us to do any of this. Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3, there are different things that will start to kick in. For example, at some point, because our elderly people are at the front line of this vulnerability, we will have at some point to limit groups going into the geriatric hospital or to the elderly, anywhere where elderly persons are being housed. Private nursing homes, district hospitals, geriatric hospitals, those wards on the QEH. We're not yet at that stage, correct? Correct. But if it comes to that, we will have to limit at that level. We then may have to go beyond groups if it comes to another stage. So at this stage in time, there are no plans for us to be able to do it. We are also aware, however, that the CMO, like he used to tell people all the time, the chief medical officer is perhaps one of the most powerful people in this nation because their word goes and they call the shots. And so long, remember I said we will always follow the science. So if they come to us and say, dunk on a brush, drop it, then so it is. But we've been luckily able to manage everything thus far, and we hope we can continue that. We got new machines last week also, to be additional machines to measure temperatures at the border. We had some before, we got some additional ones last week as well to be able to help those frontline officials. And there's a lot of questions that people will have, and we're aware. Sorry, there's a hotline number. 536-4500, because we're encouraging people that if you feel you have something to worry about, call that number. Don't come to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Once you call that number, we will have a designated polyclinic very shortly or building for you to go to, but we will also be using the Barbados Defence Force ambulances, if necessary, to be able to go to people rather than encouraging people to come to the private. We will also be working with private medical doctors and exposing them to the necessary knowledge and training to the extent that they need any additional. What I do want to say, and this became very clear in the United States if you're following the news cycle, there is not an unlimited capacity for testing kits in the world. Indeed, I am aware of some people who went yesterday to a particular hospital in a particular developed country only to be turned back that they did not have testing kits. We have some. But as Dr. Best would tell you, you don't immediately go to a test. There's a whole screening process that they use. They look at the symptoms, they look at temperature, they look at a whole host of things before deciding whether to use the test. And in many instances, a lot of people who thus far, in fact, the 8 tests that we did, in almost every instance, the person really had influenza A or B. Yeah. Okay? And we're still capable of testing for that first. And the doctors will have to determine whether they use that as a clearinghouse mechanism before we go to the more scarce testing kits. We expect to get more testing kits as well soon. Okay? Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Have there been any discussions in regard to schools?
All of that is in the plan. We are not at that stage, but if it comes to that stage, rest assured, we will take whatever decisions are necessary to protect life and then to maintain quality of life thereafter. But this country, we do best when we have a common mission. And our common mission is to protect and sustain Barbadians and to build capacity, allowing us, while we're doing that, so that when normal service resumes, we can come back better and stronger. We do not know how long it's going to be. We pray that it will be short globally, but we genuinely do not know. There's a number of medicines being trialed, but it's still too early to talk. I will also say that we have also taken precautionary action with respect to other things that may be affected by the supply chain, whether it is normal pharmaceuticals, normal equipment, normal things that we need in order to make sure that we keep as close as possible to allowing Barbadians to maintain their quality of life. But we ask you to be patient, we ask you to be cooperative, we ask you to join in this battle, starting first with protecting yourself, your family, your community, and indeed your colleagues at work. Okay? Thank you very much. Take care.